Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we are unpacking some really fascinating source material that completely challenges the traditional Sinocentric view of ancient Eurasian nomads. For centuries, the accepted historical narrative has basically been about these great, civilized empires fending off hordes of chaotic, unwashed barbarians. But what if that story is totally flawed? The author of our source makes a really compelling case that these so-called barbarians were actually the architects of highly sophisticated empires in their own right. So let's dive in and break down how the historical record might have been, well, heavily edited by the victors. To see exactly how the text breaks this all down, we'll be moving through 5 main areas: the barbarian myth, the hypocrisy of the Han, the structure of the steppe, economics in the wall, and finally, an evolving civilization.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, the barbarian myth and building dynasties.
So the author asks us to consider a massive logical gap in the traditional historical record. Were these northern nomads actually uncivilized? Think about it. If these steppe people were merely savage, unorganized outsiders, why on earth did the ancient settled dynasties rely on them so heavily just to survive and build their foundations?
Look at this. The source points out that a surprising number of foundational figures and absolutely crucial advisors in early Chinese dynasties actually had northern or nomadic roots. We're talking about heavy hitters. Yi Yin was instrumental in helping the Shang dynasty achieve power. Zhang Zia, who was critical for establishing the Zhou dynasty's foundational power, had roots in the Chang tribe. And Yu Yu, who helped Duke Mu of Qin achieve hegemony, he originated from the Shirong. The source basically argues that it's highly contradictory to call these northern groups primitive when agricultural empires consistently leaned on their political and military genius to get ahead.
Which brings us to section 2, the hypocrisy of the Han and shifting morals. The text highlights a pretty glaring double standard here in the historical timeline. See, when agricultural states were weak, they were perfectly happy to play nice. They engaged in treaties, political intermarriages, and appeasement with the nomads just to ensure their own survival. They treated them as completely legitimate, equal entities. But when those exact same settled states grew strong, the narrative magically shifted. Suddenly, military conquest wasn't just about expanding borders. It was retroactively justified as a moral crusade to civilize the savages.
The author actually pulls from historical texts to illustrate this shift. Take this famous quote from Mencius: "I have heard of using Shah to transform the barbarians, but I have never heard of being transformed by the barbarians." It perfectly shows how a pragmatic, survival-based political reality eventually morphed into this rigid, built-in assumption of cultural superiority. Basically, the settled states started believing their own propaganda.
But, the actual history on the ground was far less noble. Historical records, like the Zhuzhuan, show that leaders like Duke Xian of Jin eagerly married wrong women purely for strategic territorial gain. Settled states also frequently, and very pragmatically, broke their peace treaties, like granting nomads safe passage only to turn around and ambush them. The source argues these blatant acts of betrayal were painted over by later historians as moral necessities, basically proving that morality was often just a really convenient cover story for brutal political expansion.
Okay, moving on to section 3, the structure of the steppe and their complex states. So instead of being this unorganized mob sweeping across the plains, the source illustrates that steppe empires actually possessed a complex state structure that directly paralleled their agricultural neighbors. Think about it. Settled empires had an emperor at the top, with kings and prefects managing the day-to-day, all relying on huge infantry armies. The steppe empires? They were similarly ruled by a supreme Khan or Chanyu. Beneath them were the left and right kings who managed vast specific territories and governed a highly organized, lethal cavalry. And get this, they even shared the exact same concepts of divine right. The supreme ruler of the Xiongnu was formally titled the Tengri Hudo Chanyu. If you translate that, Tengri means heaven and Hudo means sun. So the concept of being the son of heaven was absolutely not exclusive to the Chinese emperor. It was deeply ingrained on the steppe as well, completely legitimizing the Chanyu's absolute authority.
The everyday administration of these empires was also incredibly precise. The source details how they utilized a strict hierarchy of 24 cavalry commanders to organize the military. They had very strict territorial divisions for their grazing pastures to sustain their economy. They even applied the 5 elements philosophy to their military strategy, literally sorting their cavalry horses by color depending on the cardinal direction. And perhaps most surprisingly, they actually used democratic, council-based decision-making for major state affairs, known as a Kurultai or Longcheng.
Now here is a really fascinating archaeological curveball the author throws in. Why did ancient nomads practice cranial deformation? We actually have historical and archaeological evidence showing that steppe people deliberately bound the heads of their infants to elongate the skull. I know, it sounds totally bizarre to modern ears, right?
Well, it turns out this seemingly strange cultural trait was actually a highly rational, calculated military adaptation. Here's how it worked. First, binding the infant's head creates an elongated shape. As they grow, this specific skull shape perfectly and securely holds a tall conical cavalry helmet in place, preventing it from shifting around while the warrior's riding at breakneck speeds. And that tall conical helmet design? It is highly effective at deflecting downward weapon blows during rapid combat. It is literally a perfect alignment of culture, biology, and military tech.
Let's transition to Section 4, Economics and the Wall, looking beyond just green.
We have all heard the traditional narrative, right? The Great Wall was supposedly built to protect helpless, peaceful farmers from starving nomads who were just desperate to cross the border and steal grain. But the author strongly refutes this absolute binary. Is that simplistic story really true?
Let's actually look at the evidence the source presents. First off, steppe empires actually maintained mixed economies. Archaeology shows they engaged in agriculture right alongside their herding. Second, they managed incredibly lucrative, vast trade networks all across Central Asia. Third, when they did raid, historical records show they often targeted livestock and human populations, specifically skilled artisans, rather than just burning crops for grain. And finally, some nomadic groups simply didn't eat much grain by choice, relying instead on a meat and dairy-heavy diet. So, framing them purely as starving for grain really misses the mark.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, An Evolving Civilization, the Steppe Continuum.
The author emphasizes a really crucial point here. These nomadic groups were not just isolated alien entities that randomly popped up out of nowhere to harass settled empires and then vanish. No, they were part of a continuous, evolving socio-political civilization. We see the Xiongnu dominate around 300 BC, which eventually gives way to the Xianbei and Rouran around 200 AD. By 500 AD, we see the rise of the massive Turkic Khaganats, which eventually sets the stage for the Mongol Empire expansion in 1200 AD. Each of these empires built directly upon the foundations and statecraft of the one before it.
And we can actually trace this continuous civilization right through the linguistic evidence. For example, the ancient Korean, or Baekje word uraha, which means a great leader, has distinct parallels with the nomadic word urianghai. Similarly, the Chinese term Xiongnu aligns phonetically with Hunu, linking it directly to the Huns of Western history. It is fascinating because it suggests a very deep shared cultural root spanning across the entire vast Eurasian steppe belt.
And the physical evidence backs this right up. The author points out that archaeologists find highly standardized bronze and iron artifacts, things like weapons, horse gear, tools, stretching all the way from the Caucasus Mountains in the west, thousands of miles east of Mongolia. The fact that these items are so standardized across such an immense distance indicates this wasn't just a loose collection of random tribes. It strongly suggests a highly interconnected, centralized political and cultural network that actively shared technology. All of this leaves us pondering a deeply provocative question from the source text. How much of the history we've been taught is simply the propaganda of the settled? When we step back and look at the complex governance, the profound military strategies, and the continuous evolving civilization of these steppe empires, it becomes incredibly clear they were never just mere barbarians. Has our entire understanding of this era been fundamentally distorted simply because the people who wrote the history books were the ones hiding behind the walls? It's a fascinating perspective that really forces us to reevaluate the history we think we know. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the narrative.